Hello, welcome to Ancient Craft. I'm James Dilley. Today I'm going to be making a new antler hammer. I use antler hammers all the time for flint knapping and they often get worn out quite quickly. Every so often I have to take a brand new antler and break it up into parts. Some might be used for tools, but the piece that I'm after today is the piece that I actually use to make contact with flint to take off those really long, thin flakes. Antlers come from a variety of different deer species. Here in Britain we have red deer, fallow deer, roe deer. We do have some reindeer, seeker deer and Pier David deer. Several of them are later invasive species. Some have been reintroduced, like fallow deer being reintroduced by the Normans, but several of them have almost always been here. For my antler hammer today, I'm going to be using this rather large red deer antler. I obviously can't use the whole thing, so I will need to break it up. And the breaks that I'm going to go for are going to be to remove this tine here, this second one just here, and then finally a break here. And then it'll be the face here that I'll actually use as the face of the hammer to make contact with my flint platform. The rest of the antler is clearly going to be very useful, and actually it's a shame really that this part of the beam here isn't a little bit longer, because it would make an absolutely fantastic Mesolithic T-axe here, with the blade down here and the socket for the handle here to go through, but that's often how it goes. What I have got here is an excellent section here for really long harpoon points, really nice tine here for a variety of other tools. So there's plenty here. It's that prehistoric multi-purpose material that I can use for a whole variety of different things. So how am I going to break it apart? Well, antler's actually seriously tough. You can whack it as hard as you like with a stone and it just won't break. Certainly if it's used in an untouched, untreated state like this. When you see deer crashing into each other at great speed at certain times of year because they've got an agenda on their minds, these antlers have to withstand a huge amount of shock, and that's why they make such good antler hammers, axes, or striking implements and tools, because they can withstand that huge amount of force. They're almost entirely made up of protein. They have a hard cortical outer layer and a much looser connection point in the middle that's made up of a more fibrous mass, of course known as the marrow, which is where the blood flows through as the antler grows. And amazingly, deer antlers fall off every single year, so this is less than a year's growth. As the antler grows, they can gain at 1 to 2 centimetres a day, which I suppose in a human sense, if we were having such a large growth extending off the top of our head at such a rapid rate, we'd probably go to our nearest hospital to find out what was going on. But for deer, this is a normal annual process. There is a little bit of myth about as the deer gets older, it gains another tine each time. That's not strictly true. But it's certainly, as an overall mass, can be some kind of relative indicator of its age. How did people break it up in prehistory? There's a variety of methods you can use. You can either soak the antler, which softens it. It does take a few days depending on the temperature of the water. Or you can use heat to break it, or you can use stone tools to start to make your cuts. I prefer a combination. I don't have a convenient pool or lake or river around me, so I'm going to use a combination of heat and stone tools to actually make my breaks. To begin with, I'm going to look at my start point really. Where's the easiest place to begin to break this antler? And I think I'm going to simply start with the tines. So to do that, I'm going to use some stone tools, which I've prepared earlier. How convenient is that? So these flint blades have been detached from a core using a previous antler hammer, of course, and I've put little saw blades and teeth on each of these so I can use them to start to cut in and around the antler. And I'm going to cut through that hard cortical layer through to the much softer marrow, and then I should be able to break it off, and perhaps with a little bit of heat assistance I'll be able to snap them clean off using another piece of large flint. So I'll start with this quite sturdy one. Find a comfortable point to hold the antler, as it is a rather bulky object. Let's see. Now clearly the most awkward place to get at the antler is going to be here, and I want to cut it as close to the beam as possible. So if I hold it tightly here, wrap my finger around tightly and start to cut here, and you can see with a few seconds work I'm already starting to cut through into the cortical bone. We have plenty of evidence of these saws from as far back as the Upper Paleolithic, and we know that as far back as the Upper Paleolithic people have been using antlers for a variety of tools, and there are a variety of ways of breaking up an antler. Certainly in the Neolithic, when people were using red deer antlers like this to make picks, to dig out ditches and pits, to build some of the large monuments like Stonehenge or Avebury, or to erect standing stones, or simply dig rubbish pits, they would often keep this first tine, break off the rest, and sometimes they would use stone tools to saw through, but you can use heat to go straight through and then snap the relevant parts off. So as my saw is starting to blunt, I have got to the point where I think I'm almost at the marrow. I've got a good barrel cut that goes all the way round it, so hopefully it won't take too much force to break it off, perhaps with the application of a bit of heat. I'll move on to the next tine, I think, because I think with a little bit of heat that should break off. Antler hammers for flint knapping are actually surprisingly rare in the archaeology. Despite them being so useful in the actual flint knapping process for thinning objects down, for some reason there are just an unbelievably low number that have been recovered and identified. It's possible that they get repurposed for other things, because it's only the pedicle area that you wear down, and the rest of the beam there could be used for a whole variety of other tools. One of the best collections of antler hammers came from the lower Paleolithic site of Boxgrove in Chichester, dating to around 500,000 years ago. It also makes them the oldest antler hammers, certainly in the UK. Rather than them having a extension of the beam here to make it easy to hold on to, they were actually broken very close, so they would almost be gripped like a pebble really, but clearly used for flint knapping, as several of them still had tiny flakes of flint that were embedded in the pedicle surface. That was a bit of a smoking gun effect really. But the fact that we find so many refined and very, very thin stone tools suggests that they must have been using some kind of soft hammer. There's an awkward patch there. I think I'm going to use one of my finer saws for that. These are really good sturdy tools, and you can make these very, very fine blades on a very thin flake. However, the downside of them is that they don't hold on to the tooth sharpness very long, whereas these slightly thicker flakes are perhaps a little blunter to start with, but they can withstand extended use for a long time without blunting. the wear and polish that I'm generating on this blade here will be quite distinctive from being used to cut through antler. And there's an archaeological technique that's used to analyse stone tools or lithics just like this to find out what they were used for. Amazing really that you can have these stone tools that have come out the ground after thousands of years, and under a microscope you can look at these working edges and compare the use and wear to other known experimental examples like this that I have in my hand and say, oh well, that blade that's just come out the ground and is now under my microscope has clearly been used for cutting antler, because it can be matched to the same kind of polish that someone like me has created on one of these modern ones. I'm starting to get to that point in between the smoke that my saw blades are getting a bit blunt and starting to bite too much. And I mean bite too much because they just aren't narrow enough. I could make narrower saws from very, very fine blades, but I think I'm nearly at the marrow on this second tine anyway. I have struggled a bit to get inside this bit here, but once I break off this tine, if necessary, I could access it with some ease, but hopefully not. So these two cuts were relatively easy. I've now got to move on to this large cut across here that's going to take a fair bit of time. But before that, it's worth me just trying to work out how much hammer I need, really, because if I end up making the cut up here, then I'm not going to give myself very much to hang on to. But if I decide that my cut needs to be here, then obviously I've got a much longer cut. So it's worth trying to work out where that point is, really. I think it's going to be across here. What I may well do is actually cut across into this tine a bit and then down. I think this saw is nearly at its end, really. Go to a nice fresh chunky one. Oh, yeah. You notice the difference straight away. Hopefully this gives some indication of the time investment required to make an antler hammer, certainly with stone tools and fire. I could have gone straight to fire with this, and in fact there are many antler picks out there with no evidence of cutting. They've just gone and broken it straight away. But certainly when it's something that has these joints very close and in your hand, you generally want them to be fairly clean, as you may well see soon that there will be some sharp tufty bits, and when it's just the marrow you can easily break it off, but when it's this hard cortical bone, that's a little harder to break off. I could use a piece of sandstone to grind the surface off, but it's another investment of time really, and I don't have any sandstone at the moment. And sandstone is one of those materials that is just assumed, it's everywhere. Well, there's very little around here. I'm in North Hertfordshire where there's mostly chalk and flint. You might get the occasional glacial erratic, but it's not particularly common. The next thing for me to do is to use some heat to try and denature the protein that actually makes up this antler. And with that direct heat, the bonds will start to break down, and hopefully I can place a well-aimed strike on it and it should snap. It's just starting to burn nicely there. I could hold the antler straight over the fire, but I'd end up burning a much wider area than I want to, and certainly with something like a hammer, the last thing I want is for areas to be a lot weaker. So now it's just a case of holding it against the antler, right on that joint. In fact, if I hold the stick underneath then it'll burn upwards as fire likes to into the joint. In fact, if I draw out this little ember here, I can put it directly underneath the joint there, because it's not at risk of touching the pedicle, so it won't damage that area. So that will really hopefully drive some of that heat into that joint. And if I'm careful, I could actually, I've got a spare stick, actually put an ember on this top bit here as well. If I'm feeling really ambitious, put one on this one too. But I'm going to stop there. Ember balancing is quite a skill, and I haven't quite mastered that yet alongside the flint knapping and bronze casting, so I'll stick with 3 at the moment. I'll knock them off. You can see it's really started to burn into this side, so I'll see if I can put that now broken ember under the second tine. Try and put it on that side as well. I might have to hold a stick in place on this side, so I'll pop my burning stick back in the embers. There's a small stick here. You can just see the flame licking round the cut there. It's exactly what I want it to do. Okay, let's give that one a go, and hopefully it will break off. This fairly lumpy looking piece of flint. I want to hold it in a way that I can easily and safely break it, which is why I'm also going to wear not a leaf but a pair of safety goggles, just in case I get a tine flicks back. In theory, one of the best ways to hold it would be like so, and strike it here, and hopefully it will break across here. We'll soon find out. I'm not sure if I've burnt it enough here for it to break across there, but we'll have a go. I still will have to hit it pretty hard. And there we go. Fairly straightforward. So I'd cut down enough into that side. I'll do a bit more burning on the next time. Some prehistoric patience is required at times with some of these crafts. Either the embers are desperately trying to fall off, or they're going out. Well, I think I've given that a good old scorch, and I was pretty lucky with the first two breaking off fairly easily without too much heat, just to perhaps break down that last cortical bone layer and then the marrow. So last big break now, just a nice clean strike on the top, and I'll have a nice fresh new antler hammer ready to go. Glasses on, of course. Make sure the antler's nicely secure. Perhaps a stronger bashing stone, also known as a hammerstone, and perhaps a bit more heat. I did say it was the thickest part of the antler, and it's certainly demonstrating that. Now, I really have had to burn through this quite intensely because it really is showing itself up to be the thickest part of the antler, but I'm hoping now I've got half a chance of breaking through it. The alternate is that I use this as a hammer, or as an anvil rather, and just give it a good old slog. Because this is really struggling to come off. Oh, there we go. Well, it certainly took quite a while to detach, and impressively it's managed to actually act as a breaker of flint before it's actually been detached as a hammer. But actually, now that I've got it in my hand and there isn't the rest of the antler beam, it's fairly comfortable. I may end up trying to chip off a little bit from the back here. I mean, it's burnt, so it should chip off fairly well, but certainly as I feel the weight of it in my hand, when you're using an antler hammer, it's always good if it twists in your thumb a little bit, and this feels pretty good. So I'll look forward to using this on my next bit of flint, well, proper bit of flint. And hopefully that's given you a good idea of the effort and time required to detach a good antler hammer from the rest of the antler and how much work it takes. And certainly for some of the Paleolithic hand axes from Boxgrove, although they're finely flaked, it is interesting that many hand axes out there are clearly not made using antler hammers. They've been made using hammer stones. So why invest all of that effort into detaching an antler hammer? It just seems like an excess of work, really. And are you gaining a much better tool? Does that open up questions about whether the Boxgrove hand axes were more than just a tool? Were they something to show off? Who knows? But certainly for my plethora of knapping that I do, both with flint, glass, and making things from different periods, antler hammers are a key part of my toolkit. Some knappers choose to take off the crown around the outside. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. It depends if they start to get in the way. So I hope you've enjoyed watching me battle through with this antler, and hopefully in the following videos that will come up over time you might see this very hammer feature in some of those videos, and you'll be able to think, aha, I saw him break through that antler with a slight look of frustration on his face. And it's there, I can tell you. But genuinely, I'm looking forward to using it, and I hope you enjoyed. Please remember to subscribe and share the video as well for anyone else who is sitting at home thinking, I wonder how you break an antler. You've got the perfect video to show them. Bye for now.